in the bottom third of the oven, so you've got bottom heat coming up.
Got it.
And that will help your pastry cook through. Put a baking sheet in and get that hot. You put the quiche on top of that. It gets an immediate little burst of heat on the bottom of the pastry. That also helps. And you can bake the pastry blind, and that's, simply line it with baking paper, fill it with rice or beans, and bake for 15 or 20 minutes until the pastry is set, and that will improve your pastry overall. So good pastry. I think this Royal Bobby's got lard in the pastry, which no one in New Zealand, I don't think, is going to use that.
Julie,
it does make superb pastry.
You're a legend.
Butter.
You've almost convinced us. Julie Buser, food personality, and what a wonderful panel. Alan McRoy, go away and make your coq au vin.
I will indeed.
Linda Hallinan, great to have you on. I'm Wallace Chapman.
See you. Cocktails, don't you think? Coronation cocktails. Exactly. That's what you need.
I'll see you tomorrow, 3:45. Checkpoint with Lisa Owen next.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere nei, the apartment block arson that's caused millions of dollars of damage and left hundreds of residents without a place to live. Culling a herd of regulations, National reveals its plan to supercharge the rural economy. We dig into the details with agriculture spokesperson Todd McClay. Aotearoa's on the start line in the race to host the Com Games in a decade's time. The government goes slow on introducing literacy and numeracy tests. And does the cost of childcare mean it's not worth it to work? A Napier mum of 3 crunches the numbers and they're pretty chunky. And the $8 million mix and match T-Rex. You can watch us live on the RNZ website, Facebook and Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. No mai, haere mai. Good afternoon, I'm Karen McCarthy. The Agriculture Minister is warning National's plan for the farming sector would be a major setback for environmental and water protections. The opposition party's rolled out its election year policy, pledging to slash red tape and boost labour supply through changes to the migrant worker scheme. It also includes a new panel to review all regulations and requiring 2 to be removed for every new one introduced. Damien O'Connor says the changes the Labour government has had to make over the years were needed for a modern farming industry.
We can't afford to have animals wallowing around in mud. We've got to have clean, fresh water. We've been prepared to show leadership. National's policy shows no leadership at all in these important areas.
National says a broader range of activities would be allowed on highly productive land, while protections would be focused on areas of high environmental value. The New Zealand Olympic Committee is emphasising the countrywide nature of a proposed bid to host the 2034 Commonwealth Games. The NZOC has told the Commonwealth Games Federation it's possibly interested in hosting the event, following the implementation of a new hosting model which allows for more flexible games. Sports editor Stephen Hewson reports.
Under the new Games model, a potential New Zealand event would see the sports program taking place in several cities and regions. NZOC Chief Executive Nikki Nicol says the potential bid is at an early stage and a feasibility study still needs to be conducted, but the government's given its initial backing to the process. Recent games have struggled to find hosts due to the costs. Last year's games in Birmingham cost over $1.5 billion to run. New Zealand's hosted the Games 3 times previously, the last being 33 years ago in Auckland in 1990. The 2026 Games will be held in Victoria, Australia.
The Education Minister says she isn't backing down from online testing after announcing changes to the NCEA curriculum today. Jan Tinetti has announced that next year and in 2025, schools can use NCEA standards instead of new online tests to prove students meet minimum literacy and numeracy requirements. She says the government will delay other changes to NCEA by a year to ease the pressure on teachers. Ms Tinetti says she's listened to advice from the sector.
We really needed to look at the readiness of the sector around this,
They were very firm with me is not to back off, that we know that we have to give this qualification strong credibility and that we needed to find a way through.
Jan Tonetti says she's deferred major changes to give students and teachers time to adjust. There's still no confirmation about what time water and power will be back at a fire-hit building in central Auckland. The fire that started in the basement of King's Square apartments in Newmarket yesterday has damaged a beam and structural supports have had to be put in place. The Newmarket Business Association's Chief Executive, Mark Knopf-Thomas, says around 200 residents are living without water or power and 25 businesses are still unable to operate as normal.
The businesses in this square, in this particular part of the square, they can't open because they have suffered structural damage to their businesses, and some of the windows and doors got damaged in the fire yesterday.
Mark Knopf-Thomas says water and power might be restored later today. He also says the Auckland Council is providing help if anyone needs a shelter. A man got into Auckland Zoo's rhino enclosure this morning and took a bath there. Video footage shows him climbing over a barrier and bathing in the water and washing his face. The zoo says the rhinos were understandably startled by the intruder and moved quickly to the other end of the enclosure out of harm's way. The man eventually left the enclosure and was taken into police custody. To sport, and as you heard in the news, the New Zealand Olympic Committee has advised the Commonwealth Games Federation it's interested in hosting the 2034 Commonwealth Games, given the implementation of a new hosting model allowing events to be held in several regions. The 2026 Games in Victoria will feature the first use of the model, and NZOC Chief Executive Nikki Nichols says she'll be watching closely.
What used to be a very centralised city model has now got a lot more flexibility. So for us, this certainly is a bid for all New Zealand. It's not one city that we would be looking at. And I think that feels much more Kiwi. It feels like it would be something that we can celebrate from the top to the bottom.
Another All Black has joined the injury list of those ruled out of the World Cup later this year. Crusaders loose head prop George Bauer underwent a knee reconstruction last week and won't play again this year. He joins Crusaders and All Blacks teammate Sevu Reece in being sidelined from the global showpiece in France by long-term injury. And in cricket, David Warner has been included in Australia's squad for the World Test Championship final and first two Ashes tests. The veteran opener has been under pressure after a poor run of form with the bat, but returns from injury to join the 17-strong squad for the final against India at the Oval in June and the tests against England that follow at Edgbaston and Lords. That's the news. A win for emerging New Zealand musician Thea.
That's so cool. I honestly wasn't expecting to win. I seriously wasn't.
A win for AI in photography.
Imagine if you could print what your mind's doing. That's essentially what's going on with these AI generation models.
And a settlement for Dominion voting and Fox News.
Moments ago, we learned there is a settlement in the high-stakes trial between Dominion Voting Systems and Fox.
A winning formula morning report weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Lisa Owen is here with Checkpoint next after the short forecast from Met Service to midnight on Thursday, and it's an updated one. For Northland to Tamaranui and Taupo, including Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, occasional showers. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers south of Hastings, fine spells further north today, mainly fine tomorrow. Taranaki and Taihape to Wellington, also Wairarapa, rain with some heavy falls, clearing from Wellington and southern Wairarapa by this evening and elsewhere tomorrow. Marlborough, cloudy at times. Nelson, mostly cloudy today, occasional rain tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, fine but rain spreading south tomorrow. Canterbury, partly cloudy. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, fine in central Otago and Fiordland. A few showers elsewhere, clearing tonight, mainly fine tomorrow, but isolated showers in Fiordland. And the Chatham Islands, a few showers turning to rain early tomorrow. It's coming up to 5:07.
Nā mihi Karen, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint e tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. No power, no hot water, millions of dollars of damage. Around 200 residents and more than 20 businesses are dealing with the aftermath of a massive fire in a central Auckland suburb. Authorities believe the fire was deliberately lit in the basement of a large apartment block in Newmarket. Business owners say the fire has caused huge losses to them and residents have been left to find shelter elsewhere. Reporter Liu Chen and cameraman Nick Monroe have the story.
Moving out because they can't stay here. Chen Chuansheng and his wife were carrying 2 buckets of goldfish when we arrived in Newmarket this morning. They are moving them to a friend's place because they don't want their pets to die.
I've had those fish for many years. As there's no power, we can't pump oxygen to the tank, so I have to take them to my friend's place as soon as possible.
They are among 145 apartments in the block that sits above where the fire started yesterday. Officials believe a pile of rubbish was deliberately lit. The scene today is a blackened mess, and the smell of smoke is very strong. Mr. Chen says the rubbish should have been dealt with a long time ago.
Because we live here, as far as I know, the inorganic rubbish had been here for more than a month, but it's not been cleaned properly.
Stock residents are not the only ones dealing with the aftermath. So too are nearby businesses.
Refrigerator and stock all through.
Owner of Number 1 Chicken, Sum Yang Kun, says he's lost about $2,000 as a result of business loss and wasted stock.
Electric and winter out, and so my shop and stock is no good, bad and all through. Yes.
Next door, hairstylist Mark Sun is cleaning up the salon, though they won't be able to do any business. He says the loss is huge as many appointments have been cancelled for his busy store.
For us today, we cannot open because we cannot do some work because no power, no water, it's anything just closed.
Resident Path Kokani and his family spent the night at a hotel and came back today to grab some clothes and belongings. He says they are still waiting to hear when electricity and power will be back or whether they need to extend their stay in the hotel. He hopes the damage isn't too severe.
I hope there's no internal damage. That's what we'll go up and see now. And if there's no internal damage, that's good. Otherwise, we'll have to see how to get that fixed. And we should be back by evening or tomorrow latest, I think.
The residents are all saying they are happy that no one is injured in the incident. The Newmarket Business Association's chief executive, Mark Thomas, says 145 apartments are affected and there are still 25 businesses which aren't able to operate. He says getting water and power back on is the priority, but as the damage is so extensive that there isn't a confirmed time for that.
The businesses in this square, in this particular part of the square, they can't open because they have suffered structural damage to their businesses, and some of the windows and doors got damaged in the fire yesterday.
Mark Thomas says the Auckland Council is providing help if anyone needs a shelter.
They stood up the civil defence operation to have people evacuated to a safe place to go nearby in Parnell, and they're still on standby now in case that needs to be put into operation.
Mr. Thomas says he's seen CCTV footage of young people in the area at the time the fire started.
And if you were listening to that on radio, the video version of the story will be on our webpage. It is 10 minutes after 5. Kia amo tunu mai, you're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. The National Party has made an election year appeal to farmers, unveiling a laundry list of promises to supercharge the sector. Among the proposals are a promise to slash red tape, restart live cattle exports and bring in more migrant workers. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
The National Party in safe national territory. Cattle crowding in to hear the big announcement.
I hope you all appreciate the audience behind us. I think it's very appropriate the girls have come to say hi.
The opposition MPs had their red bands on this morning as they visited a farm in the rural town of Whitford to debut the first part of their election year farming policy.
The National Party backs farmers. We know the potential of this sector.
The proposals have a focus on slashing red tape, with all regulations up for review. There's a commitment too. For every new rule introduced, National would axe too and make public the cost on farmers.
Labor has been waging a war on farmers by burying them in a heap of red tape, treating them as villains rather than a highly valued sector that can take New Zealand forward.
If every party in Parliament was to adopt something on the similar place, we might only have the weather to complain about.
The plan's gone down well with Federated Farmers and its president Andrew Hoggart, who's particularly pleased with National's efforts to dial back duplication. A promise not to ask farmers for the same information twice.
I've already reported how much nitrogen I've used to Fonterra. Having to do it a second time for the Ministry for the Environment is an absolute pain in the arse, to be pipeline.
Environmentalists are less impressed. Greenpeace's Christine Rose says National's plan is a retrograde step.
National's policies will make the climate worse and will make our lakes and rivers worse and will make water contamination worse as well.
And the Agriculture Minister, Damien O'Connor, says the regulations are there for a reason.
We can't afford to have animals wallowing around in mud. We've got to have clean, fresh water. We've been prepared to show leadership. National's policy shows no leadership at all in these important areas.
He's also alarmed by another animal welfare matter in National's policy, the resumption of live cattle exports. The government announced a ban on the practice in 2021, kicking in from the end of this month.
Once they went on the boats, they went for up to 3 weeks of travel through very hot climates. They were subject to heat stress and conditions that we would not accept within New Zealand.
National's animal welfare spokesperson Nicola Grigg is confident the practice can continue, with gold standard rules in place and purpose-built ships.
I can assure New Zealanders that these animals are treated to the absolute highest level of welfare standards that we can expect.
National also wants to bring in more farmhands from overseas, doubling the number of seasonal workers from 19,000 a year to eventually reach 38,000. Those who arrive under the Accredited Employers Scheme will be given a pathway to residency, but will lose the guarantee of receiving the median wage, $30 an hour.
Go talk to the kiwi fruit industry, who left $500 million of revenue on the table last year because they didn't have workers to do it. New Zealand does not have the luxury of just writing off huge parts of our sectors and not having them maximise their potential.
Doubling the number of people coming in without providing the protections would be stupid.
This policy is aimed squarely at shoring up National's traditional rural base. Few voters will be changing their mind as a result, but some tricky questions still remain when it comes to emissions. National says it will have more to say on that closer to the election.
National also plans to ban overseas investors buying farms to convert to forestry to mine carbon credits. So under the party's policy of one new regulation in, two out, I asked National's agriculture spokesperson Todd McClay what would go.
More and more rules without necessarily having the proper outcome. But to give you an example, one of the things we have said that we will take away and change, the government said for all farms in New Zealand, if you have a slope over 10 degrees, you cannot put animals on there in winter to feed at all, whole country. But if you think that there will be no environmental damage and you should be able to do that, pay a large consent fee and we'll come and have a look and we'll give you permission to do that. We just think that's crazy, so we'll take that away and instead say to local councils on a catchment by catchment basis, why don't we have a look at actually where there is harm and have rules around that. So, Lisa, that would be one that we would take away.
Yeah, but you've got to get rid of two, don't you? You've got to get rid of two. Two for everyone that you've brought in. That's your policy, right? And you're going to change regulations to live exports. So right there is 4 policies that you have to find to ditch, 4 regulations. Have you got them ranked? Do you know which ones go first?
No, so we haven't gone out and said, let's get an exhaustive list and rank them at the moment. It's sending a very, very clear signal to government, both central and local, that we don't want more rules, we want better. But at the same time, you would have seen that we're setting up a permanent rural regulation review panel to look at all of these, to come forward with good, sensible ideas of how we fix regulations, which ones should be taken away, and how we can make things work better.
Okay, so that review board, the rural review panel to consider all regulations, so you're getting a working group. I mean, how long is that going to take to get through the review of every piece of regulation?
No, sorry, it's not a working group. It's a permanent panel. Actually, I did one when I was Revenue Minister, and it was called, a similar sort of name. We went out and got experts and people from, business and industry come forward, and they worked away and came up with some great ideas that actually simplified the tax system, that worked better for taxpayers. So, no, it's not a working group.
So you have said that panel will consider all regulations affecting farmers, will review them. How long is it going to take to get through that body of work?
I think it should be an ongoing process. So actually, I would like to see them, having a good look at things that aren't working, that are causing the most cost with the least amount of outcome straight away, and come forward with that. If central or local government decides they want to put a rule in place, they should be able to look at that and give advice and critique it publicly, actually, if they want to, because that's how we're going to get better rules and regulations.
That's more bureaucracy, isn't it? Not less?
No, it's not more bureaucracy, because actually what we're doing is saying we should have experts there to offer really good advice and criticise or critique, just as the media does actually, a decision that seems to a local government make. No red tape or bureaucracy at all on that one.
So you're intending to double the number of RSE workers that can come into the country. What safeguards are you going to have to make sure that these workers are treated well? You'll be aware of the report which detailed the appalling treatment of those workers. The Commissioner said some of them were being treated like slaves. So how are you going to keep them safe?
Look, absolutely. And if we are to have workers in New Zealand, they need to be treated very, very well. We have an absolute obligation there to do so. The government's made changes just recently around that, where they say actually will ensure that they are treated better to the requirement we need. We accept that. In fact, we want to have a little look at it and go further if that is needed. But here's the signal that we are sending.
Potentially some more regulation and rules about how RSE workers are treated?
No, Lisa, not more rules or regulations, but certainly better ones, is the point. There are many people, particularly in kiwifruit, that do a very, very good job, and we want to have them supported so they can have the labour they need to continue to grow that sector.
Okay, on the subject of workers as well, the Accredited Employer Work Scheme, you're ditching the requirement that migrant workers be paid the median wage, about $30 an hour. So are you looking to provide cheap labour for farmers?
No, it's not about cheap labour at all. We're saying actually we think there are inequities and inequalities there, and we want to bring that back to what New Zealanders are paid.
That will result in these workers being paid less, though, won't it, Todd?
Will result in them being paid the same as New Zealanders, which I think is a level playing field.
You have said that these changes are going to supercharge the rural economy. What is the measure of supercharging? How will you know you've got there? Is it an increase in the value of exports from the rural economy? What's the benchmark for success?
Yeah, look, I think it's an increase in productivity, and it's certainly being able to export more overseas. We've got to make sure the market access for them.
How much more to reach the supercharging mark?
We will be looking towards something we should achieve, that we will tell you and others that you should hold us to, because it's the only way that we actually can drive New Zealand to make it more productive and deliver more for the New Zealand economy, to set targets to be measured against them and to be accountable to them. I'll certainly do that to you, but it will be later in the year.
And that's Todd McClay, who's the National Party's agriculture spokesperson there. 19 minutes after 5, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And we would love your feedback, homai or whakaaro, on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Let us know what you think of the National Party's policy on farming. 1 regulation in, 2 out, they're saying, and they're going to bring in live cattle exports too again, with stricter regulation, they say. 2101 on text. You can tweet us at checkpointrnz or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's go to the headlines now. Karen is standing by. Ko Karen anō tēnei.
Thanks, Lisa. Agriculture Minister Damien O'Connor says the National Party's new agriculture policy would be a major setback for environmental and water protection. Nationals pledging to slash red tape and allow a broader range of activities on highly productive land. Yesterday's big fire in Newmarket is thought to have caused millions of dollars worth of damage. Authorities believe it was deliberately lit in the basement of an apartment block. The man fatally assaulted at a Whangarei petrol station last Saturday night was 25-year-old Shaden Perkinson of Romanga. A homicide investigation has been launched. An 84-year-old white man accused of shooting a black teenager who rang the doorbell of the wrong home in the US state of Missouri has been charged with assault. New Zealand has taken a tentative step towards bidding to host the 2034 Commonwealth Games. The New Zealand Olympic Committee says a feasibility study still has to be done, but the government's given its initial backing. And heavy rain in Wellington today has overwhelmed the city's wastewater treatment plant, leading to contaminated overflows. On the traffic front in Wet Old Wellington, State Highway 2 Kelson, the right southbound lane remains blocked. Traffic congested with southbound queues back to Manor Park Road interchange after a crash near Hepton Crescent early this afternoon. Expect significant delays. State Highway 2 Melling is now clear following flooding a couple of hours ago. The northbound left lane was blocked for a time by the water. Top of the South Island, State Highway 1 Grovetown near Fell Street remains closed following a crash. Detours are in place. And again, expect a few closures across Auckland's motorway network tonight, including State Highway 16, the northwestern, Rosebank Road to Te Atatu Road, westbound lanes out of action from 10 p.m. More news headlines and traffic around 22.
Kia ora rā e ho. The New Zealand Olympic Committee's put its hand up to host the Commonwealth Games in 2034. The Games were last held here in 1990. The NZOC says if it was successful, it would be for the country to host the event, not just one city. Our sports reporter Felicity Reid joins us now for more on this. Felicity, Commonwealth Games hosts have some say over which sports are included in the Games, so what sports could feature here?
Well, the most recent games in Birmingham last year, they had women's T20 cricket, 3x3 basketball and mixed synchronised diving. They were the sports that were new to the program then. And that was partly around what suited England as hosts and also like what they might be good at, but it was also aimed at attracting new and different audiences to the games. The next games in Australia and regional Victoria in 2026, they're doing golf, coastal rowing and BMX, which will all be part of those games. So with this bid for New Zealand, this is in 11 years' time that would be potential hosts. And over the next decade, you can imagine that sports and sports competition might change a little bit. So that could influence the sports that do make the cut. There's also in New Zealand, it would be what type of facilities New Zealand has or could get built in time could play a part in that as well. But the New Zealand Olympic Committee said today that they wanted to protect the history and heritage of the Games. So there are some core sports which are in the Commonwealth Games. So that's the likes of swimming, athletics, road cycling, boxing, which is all great news for those New Zealand sports as New Zealand have picked up medals in these codes. Also, New Zealand Olympic Committee said they're looking at sports which are relevant to the Pacific. So that's showcasing some of those, the broader region and maybe some of those sports that we haven't seen before. As we know, New Zealand are also quite good at those sports on the water. So that's the rowing, kayaking and sailing, which could come up for consideration, especially if New Zealand Olympic Committee have medals in mind. But the New Zealand Olympic Committee did say that they Commonwealth Games offers a platform for sports that don't go to the Olympics or aren't part of like those big World Cup cycles. So they may also turn to some of those smaller sports to give them a bit of a showcase and favouring what works in New Zealand and what New Zealand fans are kind of into as well. And also for parasports, which have been part of the Commonwealth Games since 2002. Last year there were 8 parasports that were part of it. So there might be an opportunity there as well to put in some more parasport events.
And this next story, I have to admit, I love it. A top Scottish ultra-marathon runner has been disqualified from a race after being caught cheating. What did she do?
Well, this one happened in the GB Ultras Manchester to Liverpool 50-mile race. This is Josha Zaszewski, who's a Commonwealth Games athlete and has represented Great Britain at the World Champs. She finished third in this 50-mile race, but there was, using that GPS technology, which tracks all these runners in the race, the organisers found something a bit suspicious in her timings. It turns out that Zaszewski had actually been driven in a car for 2.5 miles, so that's about 4 kilometres.
And still only came third.
Exactly. I mean, you're a runner, Lisa. Did you ever really think that you'd jump in a car?
Not over 50 miles, I'm not. But the fact that she used a car and still only managed to come third just shows you how phenomenal number 1 and 2 were.
Well, yeah, she gave a reason to the BBC as well why she was cheating. She said that she'd arrived the night before the race after travelling back to the UK from Australia, felt sick and tired and wanted to drop out of the race. It's not a particularly good example, you wouldn't have thought.
No, not at all. Thank you for that, Felicity. That's our sports reporter there, Felicity Reid. Now, let's get more on the NZOC's interest in hosting the 2034 Commonwealth Games. Its CEO, Nikki Nicol, joins us now. Kia ora, Nikki. What could hosting look like under the new model now?
Kia ora, Lisa. Well, the new model that the Commonwealth Games Federation brought in late 2021 just gives a lot more flexibility to the hosts. In the past, everything's been centralised to one city, and that's been really expensive because of, they need to build a lot of infrastructure and assets. And so this is really, I suppose, given a lot more flexibility, and I think for us, the opportunity to put forward a bid for all New Zealand.
So what, we could have some events in Auckland, something in Christchurch and other things in other cities?
That's it, yeah, so throughout the country. And so, and part of that is because you want to use the existing infrastructure. So you think of the sporting infrastructure that we have throughout New Zealand. Part of it is also to make it more of a festival of sport. And I think the Commonwealth Games Federation have really tried to, think about their audience and what the Commonwealth Games mean. And I think, that's also trying to be much more festive and things like that. So having more accessibility for people to be involved, I think, is great.
Nikki, how about spreading it across 2 countries? Could we partner with Australia?
Well, Australia have had quite a few games, so I think they've probably had their turn and forward to going there to Victoria in 2026. But no, I think it's time for us to have our turn.
Right, so go it alone. And there's a 10-year lead-in, well, more than 10 years. Why so long? Why do we bid so far into the future?
Yeah, so where we're at the moment is the Commonwealth Games Federation are looking for a host city for 2030, and as part of the expression of interest, they talked about, they wanted feedback to see if people were considering 34 or 30, and so we've said no, 2030 is too soon for a few reasons, but we felt also time for it to go north after being in Australia in 2026. And then the other thing for us is when you think about the process, they really want to make sure people have got time to be really innovative and creative. So that's why it's going to take a bit of time for us, and we want to make sure we've got the right model that meets social, economic and cultural outcomes for New Zealand as well.
How much does a Commonwealth Games usually cost the hosts?
Well, it has varied, and I've seen a few reported articles today. So for us, there's investment, and for us, it's an opportunity to really partner with government, private sector, as well as regional communities. And if I look at Victoria, Australia, their bid is really being driven off social housing and regional development in regional Victoria. So we need to understand what are some of the priorities for this government, future governments, and also, how we can use the Commonwealth Games as a catalyst to accelerate some of those investments in priority areas that, can benefit the Games as well.
Yeah, because it's interesting that you mentioned kind of ongoing investment in infrastructure as such. I mean, are we up to it? We can't even seem to get people home on public transport from work on a Friday. We've got hiccups. Are we up to this?
Well, I'm in Australia at the moment in Brisbane as we look towards 2032, the Olympics in Brisbane, and we've had presentations from, the Brisbane Organising Committee and federal and state government, and, they're using Brisbane as a catalyst to upgrade their transport infrastructure. So for us, it also gives us a line in the sand to actually say we want to get some of this stuff sorted and really progress the benefits for the whole community as well. So, that's another lever for having an event like that as well.
Thanks for your time, Nikki. That is Nikki Nicol, who is the CEO of the NZOC, and we have expressed interest in hosting the 2034 Com Games. Let us know what your thoughts are on that one, 2101 on text. And what sports do you want to see included? It is 5:30. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Ko taku hoa NINA called Giles Beckford. Giles Beckford joins us live from Wellington to talk all things business. Okay, Giles, the little Kiwi banks that could and do. They've got the best ratings in this latest survey, haven't they?
Kia ora to you, Lisa. Yes, it's done by Consumer New Zealand. It's one of their annual surveys. It's not scientific. It's based on what people have put forward as their views. So the samples are obviously skewed in terms of numbers. It's not scientifically based per se. But it shows a clear preference, and it continues the trend that we've seen in recent years, that the little banks that are owned here in New Zealand are the ones that keep their customers happy and have the strongest loyalty. And that's why they've become known as essentially the People's Choice Banks. Top of the heap for the second year in a row is the Cooperative Bank, closely followed by TSB. These two banks in recent years have generally been well ahead of the big Australian-owned banks. I had a chat with Mark Wiltshire, who's the chief executive of Co-op Bank this morning. He was saying, essentially, number one, we're a Kiwi bank. Number two, we're owned by our members. We're a cooperative, literally. So we give a portion of the profits back to the customers by way of a rebate. So we tend to put people before profit. And from that point of view, we offer what the big banks do in terms of all the mortgages and the financial instruments and the savings and loans and the rest of it. But we actually just go that extra mile to be close to our customers. Now, I suppose if you're small or of a smaller scale, you can do that a little bit more easily. But clearly that chimes with their customers who keep coming back and saying, yep, they're better. They're measured on things such as their call centres, their ability to solve problems, just how easily contactable they are. All those sorts of things. And as I say, they're head and shoulders above the big four Australian-owned banks. Bottom of the 13 banks that were in the survey was Westpac, which rated lowly on so many measures. And clearly, being big doesn't necessarily mean that you provide better service. And in this case, it seems to be that they provide amongst the worst service around, judged against the bank. So these are the little Kiwi banks that can and have been doing. And it's interesting because an interesting lead up we'll see tomorrow morning from KPMG, their quarterly banking industry survey. They do it far more thoroughly. They go through all the numbers. I've been going through that this afternoon. I won't give too much away other than to say that the profits are high, but perhaps not for long.
And Giles, giving secrets away, inflation numbers tomorrow. Do you have a secret envelope that you're about to open live on air? What can you tell us?
Hang on. Oh, I've left it on my desk. I'm sorry. Look, the forecast, the consensus of economists, and as I said last week, economists were only invented to make astrologers look good. Their consensus is for a quarterly rise of 1.7%. That would leave the annual inflation rate at 7.2%. Now, all the usual suspects will be in the reckoning for this. High food costs, fuel is there or thereabouts, the cost of running a household, rents, power, all these sorts of things are keeping inflation up. And it just goes to show how stubborn it is. In the trade, in the economics trade, they call it sticky inflation, which is you just can't budget no matter how many rate rises that you have. There are some signs, of course, that we've been seeing that it's peaked at this level, but they just can't get it down. The measure that the Reserve Bank will really be looking for is the underlying, the core measures of inflation, and how much of that is domestically generated as opposed to how much of it is being imported. Now, the imported costs, we've been seeing those come down. Freight costs have come down. Fuel prices have been coming down. Supply chain blockages have been easing. So that means that the non-tradables, the tradables, the imported inflation probably will have less of an influence. But the issues of wages, company profits, rents and the like, these are the key domestic generators. That's what the Reserve Bank will be looking for. There will be various calculations of that, but it's expected to be somewhere around 5.5% to 6% as the core measure. That's still too high. The Reserve Bank, therefore, can be expected to keep the beatings of high interest rates still going. One more rate rise at least is expected by the markets in May, and quite possibly another one in July. That would leave the cash rate at 5.75%. It's only then that the Reserve Bank is expected to be able to sit on the sidelines, watch the numbers. Anybody who is expecting that there could be a turnaround and there could be rate cuts by the end of the year, I'm sorry, you're dreaming. That's not going to happen. Expectations are that the first of the rate cuts wouldn't be until the second half of next year at the earliest. So we'll wait and see on that one, but it's not going to be happy reading. And I'm afraid people are just going to have to grin and bear that the cost of living will remain high, and with it, interest rates.
Well, you're cheery, Giles. Let's take a spin around the markets, please.
Well, look, let me give you a little reason to smile if you're that way inclined. The top 50 index, once again, it's got this habit where it looks really lacklustre through the day, and then it has a rush of blood to the head at the end of the day in the last half hour or so. So it's ended up 34 points. That's just over 0.25%, 11,918. The New Zealand dollar, 62 US cents, or just a whisker above that. That's waiting for the inflation numbers, and 92.2 Australian.
Thank you, Giles. That is Giles Beckford live from our Wellington studio. The government is postponing the full force of its numeracy and literacy benchmark after teens complained online testing for NCEA was too hard. However, it will only be for 2 years while schools get up to speed with their teaching of reading, writing and maths. It's also deferring major NCEA changes so schools can concentrate on numeracy and literacy. Our reporter Finn Blackwell has more.
Education Minister Jan Tinetti announcing today students won't have to do online testing anymore. Those who want to can go back to regular NCEA standard tests. She says it's a new pathway.
We really needed to look at the readiness of the sector around this. They were very firm with me is not to back off, that we know that we have to give this qualification strong credibility and that we needed to find a way through.
Success rates in online writing tests have been particularly low, with last year's pilots recording pass rates of 34% and 46%. An independent review showed some students might have struggled because they weren't familiar with using computers for schoolwork, leading to suggestions the tests were unfair. While changes to NCEA Level 1 will be put in place next year, the Ministry has deferred changes to Level 2 till 2026 and Level 3 till 2027. The Minister says it was about giving students and teachers the time they need to adjust.
At the moment, we have a sector who are very completely burnt out and at capacity that they can be. And this is something that the Professional Advisory Group have been telling me around how the sector have come through COVID, and it's been a really tough time.
President of the Secondary Principals Association, Vaughan Quio, says he's confident students will be able to meet the new qualifications.
Our concern is not about the content, not about the direction of travel. Our concern was about the pace of that travel and our ability to implement change with fidelity based on the fact that a lot's happened in the last couple of seasons.
But he says they still have a lot of work to do to get students and teachers up to speed.
We've got concerns about capacity, not capability, capacity in the current climate where we're still playing catch-up from the issues we've faced in the last couple of years. You can't play catch-up and then do big advancements in terms of systemic change without something going wrong.
Post-Primary Teachers Association's Kieran Gainsford says he's glad the government has taken industry advice on board.
You know, these changes to NCEA and to the New Zealand curriculum are significant. So it's from a teacher's perspective, it's really important we get them right the first time. We're really pleased that in this case the government has listened to teachers.
The Ministry says they're necessary changes needed to get the literacy and maths curriculum right.
It is almost 20 to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let's get to some of your feedback now. Lots of it coming in on National's agriculture policy. They're going to supercharge the farming sector, they say. This listener says, thank goodness for the National Party farming policy. Finally an end to the madness. Other side of the coin, though, this listener says half-baked, needs lots of detail, and some ranking lists would be a start. That's the policies that they intend to drop. Another says, on the subject of live animal exports, no, taking a step back from a progressive move with that policy. Modern society has little appetite for such cruelty. And another says, National's agricultural policies are mostly backward steps, especially regarding the environment, farm workers, and failed livestock shipments. That one is from Sue. And the words sound correct, but when applied will lead to exploitation of migrant workers. That's another listener's reckons. They're going to double the number of RSE workers coming in and get rid of the median wage requirement for registered employers. Do keep your feedback coming on that one, 2101 on text, or anything else you've heard on the program this evening. You can tweet us at checkpointrnz, and our email address is checkpoints@rnz.co.nz. It's time to go to the headlines now. Anea Karen, Mina Pitapita Kōrero.
The National Party has made an election year appeal to farmers, vowing to supercharge the agricultural sector if elected. Among the proposals are a promise to slash red tape, restart live cattle exports and bring in more migrant workers. Nationals Agriculture spokesperson Todd McClay told Checkpoint the party's sending a clear signal to the government that farmers have had enough of being over-regulated. Greenpeace has condemned the policy as a retrograde step that will lead to more polluted rivers and drinking water. It says farmers are under-regulated, not over. There's still no confirmation about when water and power will be restored at an apartment complex in Newmarket, hit by a big fire yesterday. The Newmarket Business Association's chief executive, Mark Knopf-Thomas, says supply might be restored later today. The police have arrested 7 people after working with logistics sector insiders to thwart a gang drug ring. The operation was shut down and a 1/4 tonne of methamphetamine was seized with the help of insiders allegedly working with the Killer Bees gang in the sector. And 11 Indonesian fishermen are recovering in an Australian hospital after spending 6 days trapped on a remote island 300 kilometres off the Australian coast without food or water. They were winched off by a rescue helicopter after being spotted by a Border Force plane on patrol. On the traffic front in Wellington, where the wet weather has played havoc today, the State Highway 1 Glenside on-ramp will remain closed for the next few hours due to a slip. Crews are still out assessing and the on-ramp is closed to southbound traffic. Motorists should use alternative routes. State Highway 2 Kelson is now clear following an earlier crash. In Waikato, a section of road is now closed on State Highway 3 south of Te Kuiti due to a crash. That's just north of Mangarongo Road at Mahoenui. Delays are likely. There may be diversions. Top of the south, State Highway 1 Grovetown near Fell Street remains closed. And again, expect closures across Auckland's motorway network tonight, including the northwestern State Highway 16 Rosebank to Te Atatu Road, westbound lanes shutting down from 10. We'll have more news and weather at 6.
Ngā mihi, Karen. One of the main advocates behind a proposal to restore the original Māori name to the Bay of Islands town of Russell is confident it has the support needed. Submissions to restore the name Kororareka closed yesterday and a result is due back later this year. Ashley McCall reports.
Nestled on a tranquil bay in the winterless north lies the country's first capital, currently called Russell. But if the Geographic Board decides, its official name could revert back to Kororareka. The chair of the Kororareka Marae Society, Deb Rewiri, has held a series of public meetings about the proposal. She's confident the majority is in favour.
Between, say, 80 and 93% were in favour. Some of them wanted to retain Russell, so have Kororareka/Russell, but we said the New Zealand Mapping Board are not in favour of having dual names.
Kororareka means sweet penguin, the korora, little blue penguin, and reka for sweet. It was renamed by settlers sometime in the 1840s after the leader of the British House of Commons, Lord John Russell, a man who never set foot here. Miss Rewiri says a name change makes sense and will give the town more of an identity.
A lot of people that had businesses under the name of Russell B&B businesses, we said that doesn't change, it doesn't matter what we're looking for. And someone rightly said, what we're looking at is that there are 29 towns within the world that are called Russell. There will only be one Kororareka.
The Far North District Council supports the proposed change, but Deputy Mayor Kelly Stratford says there are some reservations, such as whether there will be funding to change signage around town. She says some residents are upset about a possible change, but Kororareka is already in common use.
I think that there'll still be the use of Kororareka and the very prominent signage that's already in place and using of Kororareka. If it does go through, I think we'll see more signage and just that recognition will be something really exciting.
The chair of the local marae, Deb Rewiri, says she doesn't see any logic to keeping the name Russell.
Even to the point where we said to people, please don't write, you hate the name Kororareka because it won't get any traction. Put some rationale behind your thinking. So I wanted people to think more deeply around why they didn't want the restoration of the name Kororareka.
Land Information NZ says it's still counting how many submissions were received before they're presented to the Geographic Board, Potaunaha, in June, but says its decision-making isn't driven by a numbers game. It will consider reasons why people support or object to the proposal before it either makes a decision or refers it to the minister. Either way, it says a final decision is likely this year.
It's 14 minutes to 6. Kia amo tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Fox News has settled one of the biggest ever defamation suits in America, paying Dominion Voting Systems more than $1.2 billion over false claims of voter fraud during the 2020 presidential election. In a last-minute settlement before trial, the network agreed to pay out about half of what the voting machine company was asking for. Dominion argued its business was harmed by Fox spreading lies that the election had been rigged against Donald Trump.
Electronic voting machines didn't allow people to vote, apparently. And that, whatever you think of it, the cause of it, it shakes people's faith in the system. That is an actual threat to democracy.
Sydney, we talked about the Dominion software. I know that there were voting irregularities. Tell me about that.
The president's lawyers alleging a company called Dominion, which they say started in Venezuela with Cuban money and with the assistance of Smartmatic software, a backdoor is capable of flipping votes.
The settlement means Fox giant Rupert Murdoch won't have to testify in court. Instead, Fox issued a statement vowing its commitment to the highest journalistic standards, something CNN anchor Jake Tapper had a hard time swallowing.
One of the ugliest and most embarrassing moments in the history of journalism, Fox issued a statement saying, quote, "We are pleased to have reached a settlement of our dispute with Dominion Voting Systems. We acknowledge the court's rulings finding certain claims about Dominion to be false. The settlement reflects," I'm sorry, this is going to be difficult to say with a straight face. "This settlement reflects Fox's continued commitment to the highest journalistic standards. We are hopeful that our decision to resolve the dispute with Dominion amicably instead of the acrimony of a divisive trial allows the country to move forward from these issues." Unquote.
Axios correspondent Sarah Fisher explains what happened in court today.
This trial was supposed to last for 6 weeks, and at the very last minute, right before opening statements started, we got a settlement. Now, we know that the whole court case was delayed by a day, but once we got in there day 2, which was this morning, things felt like they were going according to plan. So first we started with the finalizing of the jury selection. That went pretty smoothly. Now, at first it was fine, and they would tell us, 5 more minutes. We're just taking a bathroom break. But then when the hours went on and on, we realized something is weird. And then what we would notice is that Dominion's lawyer, Justin Nelson, would be walking over to Dan Webb, Fox's lawyer, and it didn't seem contentious. They seemed pretty relaxed. They were talking to each other. Then they go to their respective sides. So after hours of delay and seeing these two lawyers speak to each other in what seemed like a pretty jovial manner, that's when I think a bunch of reporters start to get their hands in the keyboards and start pre-writing a settlement. We knew it was coming. And then at 3:58, the judge comes back and he said the parties have resolved their dispute.
It is 11 minutes away from 6. A dying Dunedin man is urging patients waiting for too long to see a specialist to help save their own lives by picking up the phone. It follows a damning investigation by the Health and Disability Commission last week, which found 6 years of delays and disruptions in the Southern District had caused physical and psychological harm to patients. Stephen Hoffman spent 10 months on a waiting list in 2016 for urgent prostate cancer surgery. It spread to his liver and lungs, and he now has a tumour at the base of his brain. The DHB has since apologised for shortening the 68-year-old's life. Stephen invited us into his home in Dunedin this afternoon, and I asked him what had changed.
It's just down to funding again, and they're just not coming forth with what they need to do. It's funding.
What do you think of that? That you had incredibly poor care, waited twice the recommended times, and that stuff is still happening?
Well, no, I want to correct you just a wee bit there. I didn't actually have poor care. The care I had has been absolutely fantastic, but it was the administration side of it. And what I picked up on was that they were using inexperienced people to do jobs that needed really highly qualified people to be triaging people to what they were doing. So when they triaged me, they had me pretty close, but not close. It should have been 2 weeks instead of 6 weeks. And time is the biggest thing in any of these cancer problems. You have to get onto it and at least diagnose it, and then you know what you're up against. But letting people sit and wait to see what happens is just ridiculous.
Stephen, what would you say to people who are waiting to see a specialist, are waiting for a diagnosis, and they might have been waiting already longer than they should have?
Well, once I learnt the game, so to speak, I was given 2 to 5 weeks for a biopsy to be done. And so when the 2 weeks come up, I picked the phone up. And I'd already been lost that first time. So this time she told me 17 weeks. And I goes, well, actually, I was lost again. She didn't even have me on the books for the second time. And this is how the hell do you lose people like that? But anyway, so I did a bleat tour about my family and my boss needing to know where I was at. So, and 10 minutes later, she rings me up and comes up with 7 weeks. So I said, well, that's a bit better than 17. So that's what happened. So anyway, it's time. Time is the biggest thing, and people have to, like originally we used to treat the hospital like God and the doctors, and what they said goes. Well, not anymore. You pick that phone up and you get what you want. And if you can't get it from that guy, you pick it up and ring someone else.
What's your message to people who have the power to change the things that matter in our health system?
Put themselves in the bloody boots of the cancer person. How would you like it if it was one of your family or yourself? So just put yourself there and just imagine what it would be like and get on with the job and bloody get people fixed. It's ridiculous like this.
So they understand, Stephen, what is it like to be in your boots right now?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm 68. People say it's young, but it's not good. I got a lot of things I wanted to do, but I just hope that doing this can just help some people not be in my boots, and basically just, especially young people, just get them fixed up.
And that is cancer patient Stephen Hoffman there. Exhausting sick leave, forking out for private medical procedures and being told outdated information by health professionals are just some of the ongoing challenges that women with endometriosis face. Endometriosis is an inflammatory disease with symptoms including period and pelvic pain, subfertility and infertility. Despite the disease estimated to affect 1 in 10 women and those assigned female at birth, it takes 8 years on average to be diagnosed and there is no cure. RNZ's Charlie Drever has spoken to sufferers of endometriosis about the impact the disease has on their lives and the experts who are pushing for a national action plan. She filed this report with videographer Cole Easton-Farrelly as part of the in-depth project, The Deadline.
Awareness around endometriosis and that it isn't normal to have severe pain with your periods is growing. But gynaecologist and endometriosis specialist Dr. Michael Wynne-Williams says some medical myths, like prescribing pregnancy as a treatment or cure, are hard to shake.
And we know from research that's been done in Australia that many women get told that you've got endometriosis, you need to get pregnant, and you need to get pregnant straight away. And that's often by family members who have experienced endometriosis and been told the same thing, but also, unfortunately, by health practitioners, and that's really difficult.
This was the advice given to Caitlin just a couple of years ago. When she said to the specialist she didn't want children, she was told to wait a year on birth control before they would even consider surgery to treat her endometriosis. The specialist informed Caitlin her decision not to have children made them reluctant to operate.
It kind of felt a bit like I was being treated like a uterus. Like the rest of me didn't really matter, because as long as the uterus was fine and I could pop out some kids, it was not an issue. And because I didn't want to pop out kids, it didn't matter.
Unhappy with that answer, Caitlin went to a private surgeon in Christchurch who confirmed she had severe endometriosis.
They found extensive stage 4 endometriosis with some deep infiltrating endometriosis. They found a lot of adhesions. They found my bowel was adhered to my pelvic wall. They found endometriomas on one of my ovaries. They found bladder endometriosis. It was on my utera, which is the tube from the kidney to the bladder. The surgeon said the only place in my pelvis there was an endo was on my fallopian tubes.
Caitlin had to take a week annual leave to receive her surgery because, thanks to her endo, she had already exhausted her sick leave. Chief Executive of Endometriosis New Zealand, Tanya Cook, says there's still a lot of stigma around the condition in the workplace.
We know that from the research conducted last year in New Zealand that 75% of the participants were scared to tell their employer or their boss that they had endo. And that's just horrific, having to go into a workplace and have that fear. We also know from research in Australia that 1 in 6 people with endo had actually lost their job.
But work is underway to improve the lives of those with endometriosis in this country.
We've been working on the Women's Health Strategy submission, and we've done a lot of work around completing that submission. And as an organisation, we would like to see the New Zealand government develop an endometriosis action plan.
Something Dr. Wynne-Williams knows about firsthand.
Having been in Australia when they instigated the National Action Plan, I saw the differences that made to education, to patients, to health practitioners, to improvement in clinical practice and guidelines, but also funding to research.
That submission is now in front of the Ministry of Health.
And if you are listening to that story on radio, the video version will be on our webpage. Quick bit of feedback before the news on the National Party's policy, farming policy. If National are against regulation, then they won't put any on farmers, therefore they won't be removing 2. This is on the 2-for-1 policy. Their policy doesn't seem to make sense, this person says. On the cheetah and the long distance run overseas, number 1 and 2 runners must have had faster cars, says Mark. That's the woman who came 3rd in the ultra marathon after, travelling a little bit of the race in a car.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Karen McCarthy. The Agriculture Minister is warning National's plan for the farming sector would be a major setback for environmental and water protections. The opposition has released its election policy, accusing the government of declaring war on farmers. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Pitching to its traditional rural base, National is pledging to slash red tape, boost the supply of migrant labour and restart live animal exports. A new panel would review all regulations alongside a requirement for 2 to be removed for every new one introduced. Damien O'Connor says changes made under Labour were needed to meet modern-day environmental protections and market expectations, which National's plan would jeopardise. National says a broader range of activities would be allowed on highly productive land, while protections would be focused on areas of high environmental value.
Under National's policy of one new regulation in and two out, the party's agriculture spokesperson Todd McClay has told Checkpoint the party's not looking for more rules, just better rules.
At the same time, so you would have seen that we're setting up a permanent rural regulation review panel to look at all of these, to come forward with good, sensible ideas of how we fix regulations, which ones should be taken away, and how we can make things work better.
The Employment Relations Authority will try to break the impasse in secondary teachers' stalled pay talks. It'll facilitate bargaining between the Post-Primary Teachers Association and the Education Ministry and could recommend a settlement. The decision comes just a week before PPTA members are due to start industrial action, including rolling strikes. The negotiations began nearly a year ago and are stalled over an offer that includes a pay rise of $6,000 over 2 years. The union says that's about half the rate of inflation for most teachers, and the ministry is too constrained by other public service settlements. Fox News has settled a defamation case brought against it by the voting machine company Dominion for its reporting of the 2020 US presidential election. The broadcaster will pay Dominion more than $1.2 billion. The firm had accused Fox of knowingly spreading false claims that machines were used to rig the election against Donald Trump. Dominion's lawyer, Justin Nelson, said the settlement represented vindication.
The truth matters. Lies have consequences. Over 2 years ago, a torrent of lies swept Dominion and election officials across America into an alternative universe of conspiracy theories.
Fox is also facing a lawsuit from another voting tech firm, Smartmatic. There's still no confirmation about when water and power will be back at a fire-affected building in central Auckland. The Newmarket Business Association's chief executive, Mark Knopf-Thomas, says around 200 residents from Kings Square apartments are living without water or power, and 25 businesses are still unable to operate as normal. He says water and power might be restored later today. Mr Knopf-Thomas also says an emergency shelter has been set up in nearby Parnell. The Far North Deputy Mayor says the original name for the Bay of Islands town Russell will remain, whether it's officially reinstated or not. Submissions to restore the name Kororareka closed yesterday, and a result by the Geographic Board is due back later this year. Kelly Stratford says despite some residents being upset about a possible change, Kororareka is already in common use.
I think that there'll still be the use of Kororareka and the very prominent signage that's already in place and using of Kororareka. If it does go through, I think we'll see more signage, and just that recognition will be something really exciting.
Land Information New Zealand says it will base its choice on reasons outlined in these submissions. Heavy rain in Wellington today has overwhelmed its wastewater treatment plant, leading to contaminated overflows. Wellington Water says during significant rain, massive amounts of stormwater flood the system with higher volumes than they can handle. It says it's working to manage the situation, but expects the contaminated discharges to stop as the rain begins to ease. Swimmers and other recreational water users are advised to stay out of the harbour and city beaches for 2 or 3 days after heavy rain and check pollution levels first. The police have arrested 7 people after working with logistics sector insiders to thwart a gang drug ring. 5 men and 2 women were arrested after a 1/4 tonne of methamphetamine was seized before it could enter the country. The operation was shut down with the help of insiders allegedly working with the Killer Bees gang in the logistics sector. The arrested men, whose ages range from 29 to 55, and the women, aged 31 and 32, will appear in the Auckland District Court. The presidents of Poland, Germany and Israel will gather in the Polish capital today to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Church bells and sirens will sound at midday local time in memory of hundreds of young Jews who fought back against Nazi troops. The BBC's Adam Easton is in Warsaw.
The Warsaw Ghetto was razed to the ground by the Germans, but in 1939 the Polish capital was home to the world's largest Jewish community outside New York. At its height, the Nazis imprisoned almost 500,000 people behind the ghetto's brick walls. Most were murdered in the Treblinka death camp. Many others died of disease and starvation. Before the final deportations, hundreds of young Jews decided to fight. The Germans expected a few days' resistance, but the fighting went on for 3 weeks.
That's the news.
Tomorrow on Afternoons with Jesse Mulligan, our series on New Zealand sports history continues with Bruce Ulrich. Bruce was Vice Chairman of the Organising Committee of the 1974 Christchurch Commonwealth Games, and he also held the role of chef de mission to 3 Olympic and Commonwealth Games teams, and has been an avid bidder in trying to bring the Winter Olympics to New Zealand. Plus, Link 3 and Dr. Grant Morris is in to talk history. That's all from 1 p.m. tomorrow on Afternoons with Jesse Mulligan here on RNZ National.
Back to Checkpoint and Lisa Owen after the short forecast from Met Service to midnight on Thursday. For Northland to Tamaranui and Taupo, including Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, occasional showers. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers south of Hastings, but fine spells further north today, mainly fine tomorrow. Taranaki and Taihape to Wellington, also Wairarapa. Rain with some heavy falls, clearing from Wellington and southern Wairarapa by this evening and elsewhere tomorrow. Marlborough, cloudy at times. Nelson, mostly cloudy today, occasional rain tomorrow. Bull and Westland, fine, but rain spreading south tomorrow. Canterbury, partly cloudy. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, fine in central Otago and Fiordland. A few showers elsewhere, clearing tonight. Mainly fine tomorrow, but isolated showers in Fiordland. And the Chatham Islands, a few showers turning to rain early tomorrow. It's 6:07.
Thanks, Karen. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. It could be good news if you're planning a Christmas trip to the US, direct flights from Christchurch to America. From the start of December, a United Airlines Dreamliner will depart the South Island 3 times a week. The return trips bringing Americans here is predicted to put millions into the economy. Well, joining us now from Christchurch Airport, the General Manager of Trade Development, Scott Callaway. Kia ora, Scott. Tell us a bit more about the plan, these flights, please.
Yeah, kia ora, Lisa. It's been a good day at Christchurch Airport today. Wow. These big airlines flying in directly into the South Island, they're hard wins for us. They bring, as you've just mentioned, great connectivity for South Islanders travelling out, and United, one of the biggest carriers in the world, flying direct to San Francisco. That is great news. And on the inbound side, we're going to have a full summer season, 3 flights a week, bringing North Americans in. Almost 80 cities in the US will be one stop away from the South Island. So that is great news. And economically, of course, that's a big win for the South Island.
Any projections for the dollars you reckon it could bring to the region?
Tourism dollars, about 40 million, of which, and look, these are pretty broad estimates, but about 30 million of that would be sticky in the South Island. Not everyone that will fly into Christchurch will end up spending all of their vacation in the South Island. That's obviously the big attractor, but some of them will travel through the North Island as well. And so the New Zealander is the winner of about $40 million in tourism spend. But outbound, and we learnt this through COVID, just how important the freight going out from the South Island is, be about $180 million of high-value primary produce going straight into American markets.
So what kind of stuff in that primary produce?
Because it's summertime, this first iteration of the service will run 4 months from December 1st. We would expect that to grow over time to be longer, but that's the peak season for cherries going out to North America, fresh cut flowers, high value lamb going out at this time of year, particularly into restaurants. So the really good high value stuff that is time sensitive.
Scott, you mentioned obviously it's for the summer and you're hoping for a bit of an expansion. I mean, what are the chances of that? Why are they just, well, it looks like they're trialling it, basically.
Well, it's picking the really peak part of the season for inbound tourism. Look, routes need passengers on both ends. So while this is a major play for North Americans coming in, of course there are seats going out for South Islanders as well. But our services at Christchurch tend to start off with a short season and then we look to grow. That was very similar with our experience with China Southern and getting direct services from China. So we would expect it to grow. We've got another angle here on this, and that's the Antarctic program. Antarctic program here in Christchurch has the US base, and it brings in about 3,000 scientists and other specialists into Christchurch and then down to the ice. So that's a big bonus longer term for United to be able to take a part of that.
So, San Fran for now. Have you discussed any other routes with them?
Look, we're always looking, Lisa, we are always looking for more routes. But right now, this was a good day to be at Christchurch Airport because this is a big win.
Yeah, how much difference does it make to you, the airport?
It makes a huge difference because, the passengers are important to us, but our airport is owned by the City of Christchurch and central government. So our remit is one to, particularly now that we have a reinvigorated Christchurch, we want to encourage more visitors into Christchurch. And we also want to get a good spread of visitors across the South Island. So these visitors, North American visitors, stay longer. They stay about 40% longer than visitors to the rest of New Zealand if they come in directly from Christchurch, and they spend about 30% more. So these are high-value visitors spreading out across the South Island. It is a good news story for South Island, New Zealand.
Scott, I know you don't control ticket prices, but for people flying out of Christchurch, is it going to mean, well, they might get a cheaper deal because there's a bit more competition?
Look, there's been some talk in the media today that, the extra capacity is going to make competitive airfares. I looked at airfares today, and around that $1,700 to $1,800, there's a round-trip ticket on offer right now to go to San Francisco. So that doesn't feel too expensive to me at all. Look, the fares are highly dynamic. Pricing, so they could go up and down from that, but they're certainly starting off at a pretty reasonable level.
Thanks for your time, Scott. That's Scott Calloway, who is the General Manager of Trade and Development at Christchurch Airport, announcing today, obviously, that United Airlines, a Dreamliner, is going to be coming into the South Island 3 times a week. A social media post from a Napier mum who's crunched the childcare numbers and says it's too expensive to go back to work has sparked a lively debate and highlighted a potential blind spot in government policy. Anna Catley and her husband have 3 children under 3, a son and twin daughters. The sales and marketing manager ran the numbers for a return to work and says they simply don't add up. Anna explained she'd need to earn more than $35 an hour to be left with $170 a week in her pocket after paying for childcare.
I worked out that by the time I pay for my son's in-home care, which is I think $7 an hour, and my twins, which is I think from memory $11.70 per hour, that's with a 10% multiples discount, I would basically need to earn $26.70 per hour before tax just to pay for childcare. So then I took that sort of one step further and thought, okay, well, if I got, say, $35 an hour, working a full week, what would that look like for our family? And basically at the end of the day, I would get $170 in the hand after tax and childcare, which is ridiculous. And I mean, I thought I would spend that on petrol to get, to and from all the daycare drop-offs into work. And at the end of the day, it's just not worth it for us with 3 under 3. Yeah.
Wow, that are some serious numbers there. And I'm just kind of calculating in my head, to get your $170 in the hand for working a full week while your kids are in childcare, that means you'd need to make at least around $70,000 a year. Which is... Yeah. So you'd need a pretty good job, basically, to even come out with $170 a week.
Yeah, $35 an hour is like, that's probably on the upper scale of, I mean, the living wages, do you know what the living wage is? I can't remember. I did look it up, but it's more than the living wage, what I would need to pay for childcare. I'd need more than that. It's ridiculous. And I think a lot of families, I guess the story has resonated with them because it's so relevant for Kiwi families these days with the cost of living, which is, everything is just so expensive. And mums are having to return to work a lot earlier than they may have previously planned just to pay for everything. But I mean, I guess in our case, there's no point because I'm not working 40 hours for $170 and then having to come home and, do all the cooking, cleaning, obviously with my husband as well, but still it's a big job.
And your calculations don't even take into account, as you say, the cost of getting to that job, petrol, whatever you may need to do that.
Yeah, and the stress around all that. Like, I think it would be really stressful for having two working parents and trying to coordinate 3 children, getting them out the door in the morning. I take my hat off to parents that do it. Yeah.
What would make it worth it? If $170 isn't worth it, what would you need to bring home in order to think it was worth paying for the childcare and putting your kids in childcare?
Well, where I got to kind of with the maths and everything was that an 8 to 5 office job isn't going to work for me and our family. But I thought, I've still got a lot to offer an employer. I've got, I'm marketing and sales background. And I thought, well, I've got to think outside the box here and use my skills. So by, I guess, raising attention to this issue, my idea would be if I could maybe pick up some freelance work for companies and do a bit of work from home when my husband's home or when the kids are asleep. I've still got, a lot to offer, but I just can't do it, at an office in that time period just because it's not really worth it.
You have highlighted a particular issue because your children are under the age of 3. You've got 3 under the age of 3 and you're 20 hours of free childcare. That doesn't kick in until your children are 3. So it leaves a bit of a blind spot. What do you think of that?
I would love to see that reviewed because, obviously maternity leave only goes for 6 months and then after that, mums are having to think about considering going back to work earlier. But for that time where they're 6 months until they're 3, there's this time where families are having to fork out a lot of money for childcare. Like, basically, just off the cuff, it's probably $250 for a child to be in childcare for a whole week. So if you've got 2 kids even, that's $500. What's that mean that you need to earn before tax? That's a lot for a lot of families. So it's very hard, and I would love to see that be reviewed and things. Yeah.
So an extension of that policy perhaps to cover under 3s if you're wanting to return to work.
Yeah, definitely. I think that would make a huge difference. And I mean, like, when mums go back to work, that's them contributing to society. They're paying taxes and things like that. So I think it's advantageous for the, economy if mums are working and, they'll have more money that they can spend and things. So hopefully, if that was reviewed, then everyone would win.
And that's Napier, mother of 3, Anna Catley. It is 19 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. As part of its $1.2 billion settlement with Dominion Voting Systems, Fox News won't have to admit on air that it spread lies about the company. Dominion argued its business was harmed by Fox, spreading false claims the 2020 presidential vote was rigged against Donald Trump. But just before the high-profile defamation trial was due to begin, a deal was struck. The ABC's Rachel Mealy reports.
It all began with this.
This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election.
In the weeks that followed the 2020 presidential election, Rupert Murdoch's Fox News network not only repeated the president's lie, but amplified it, peddling a further falsehood that Dominion Voting Systems were to blame for what they called the stolen election.
And the president's lawyers alleging that American votes in a presidential election are actually counted in a foreign country.
This whole fraud is an insult against this country.
Today, Fox News paid a hefty price. Dominion's lawyer Justin Nelson spoke outside the courthouse where the defamation trial was about to begin.
The truth matters. Lies have consequences. Over 2 years ago, a torrent of lies swept Dominion and election officials across America into an alternative universe of conspiracy theories, causing grievous harm to Dominion in the country.
Apart from the money, Fox News admitted it made false claims about Dominion. Justin Nelson says it was a win not only for the company, but for democracy itself.
Today's settlement of $787,500,000 represents vindication and accountability. Lies have consequences. The truth does not know red or blue. People across the political spectrum can and should disagree on issues, even of the most profound importance. But for our democracy to endure for another 250 years, and hopefully much longer, we must share a commitment to facts.
The 11th hour settlement called off what would have been one of the most watched courtroom dramas of all time. Rupert Murdoch, the 92-year-old chief executive of Fox, was called to testify in the case, along with high-profile Fox presenters like Janine Pirro and Tucker Carlson. In preparing for the case, Dominion had unearthed embarrassing internal emails from Fox proving that the hosts knew their claims were false but were good for TV ratings. Dominion's chief executive, John Poulos, says the company has been through a lot.
Fox has admitted to telling lies about Dominion that caused enormous damage to my company, our employees, and the customers that we serve. Nothing can ever make up for that. Throughout this process, we have sought accountability and believe the evidence brought to light through this case underscores the consequences of spreading lies.
The 84-year-old white man in Missouri accused of shooting a black teenager who mistakenly rang his doorbell has turned himself in. Andrew Lester allegedly shot 16-year-old Ralph Yarl once in the head and once in the arm. The teenager survived. Also at the weekend in New York State, a man was charged after a young woman was shot dead when she accidentally turned into his driveway. CNN's Lucy Kavanagh reports.
Andrew Lester, the 84-year-old white homeowner charged with shooting Ralph Yarl, a 16-year-old black teenager, turned himself into authorities today and was released on $200,000 bond and a prohibition on him possessing weapons. 5 days after he allegedly opened fire on the teenager who rang the doorbell at the wrong address, shooting Yarl through a glass storm door with a .32 caliber revolver. Yarl's mother spoke with CBS News about the events of that night when Yarl went to pick up his younger brothers from a friend's home.
While he was standing there, his brothers didn't run outside, but he got a couple of bullets in his body instead of a couple of twins coming up out and giving him a hug.
Lester faces 2 felony charges in the shooting, assault in the first degree and armed criminal action. The incident unfolded on the front porch of the home behind me, the homeowner telling police that Ralph Yarl came up to his front porch. He rang the doorbell, but Ralph had made a mistake. This home is located at 115th Street. The home he was supposed to go to is 1 block away, right there, 115th Terrace. According to the probable cause statement, Lester told investigators he was in bed when he heard the doorbell ring, then picked up his gun before responding to answer the door. He said after opening the main door, he saw a black male approximately 6 feet tall, and he believed someone was attempting to break into the house and shot twice within a few seconds of opening the main door. He also told investigators that no words were exchanged and is quoted as saying he was scared to death by the teenager's size and by his inability to defend himself.
The Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich has appeared at the Moscow court to appeal the terms of his detention. He asked that he be put under house arrest rather than in jail, but a judge denied his request. Mr. Gershkovich was detained in late March and formally charged with espionage. The White House has officially designated him as wrongfully detained by Russia. CNN's Matthew Chance reports.
It's the first glimpse of Evan Gershkovich for weeks. The US reporter accused in Russia of espionage, standing, arms folded, behind a glass courtroom cage. He even manages a smile for the cameras. A few journalists call out their support. Hold strong, one shouts. Everyone sends you a big hello, the voice says, before being hustled away. But the court rejected an appeal for bail. or for Gershkovich to be kept under house arrest instead of in prison. Outside, his lawyers spoke of how he was holding up behind bars. Reading classic Russian novels, one said, and watching cooking shows on TV. But the US ambassador was far more critical, expressing her concerns at his confinement.
I can only say how troubling it was to see Evan, an innocent journalist, held in these circumstances. The charges against Evan are baseless, and we call on the Russian Federation to immediately release him.
Amid its brutal invasion of Ukraine, Russia has been stepping up its crackdown on free speech and dissent, using the war as cover to silence independent journalism or to jail long-standing critics like Vladimir Kara-Murza, sentenced to 25 years for treason just this week after speaking out on the conflict.
The war crimes, these are war crimes.
And the pressure is maintained behind bars. Last month, supporters of Alexei Navalny, the jailed Russian anti-corruption campaigner, accused the authorities of poisoning the Kremlin critic again, this time at a penal colony. Now his lawyers say he's been beaten up in his cell and faces new criminal charges. It is against this backdrop that Evan Gershkovich remains detained in a Moscow prison. Determined, say his lawyers, to defend himself, but utterly at the mercy of an increasingly authoritarian Russian state.
The first complete Tyrannosaurus rex skeleton ever to be auctioned in Europe has sold for more than $8 million in Switzerland. Nicknamed Trinity, the 67 million-year-old specimen is made up of the bones of 3 different dinosaurs unearthed in the US. But its price tag has raised concerns about the privatisation of historical artefacts. The BBC's Palab Ghosh reports.
There are only around 24 good T-Rex skeletons in the world, and experts say that this is one of the bigger and better ones. It's the latest dinosaur specimen to be sold at auction to private collectors for millions, amounts which few, if any, museums can compete with, according to Professor Steve Brusati, a dinosaur expert at Edinburgh University.
Very rare dinosaur skeletons are disappearing into the vaults of super rich collectors, because anytime a fossil goes up for auction, that means it's not available for science, it's not available usually for public display.
But other scientists say that many privately owned specimens end up being loaned to museums. And the Swiss auction company that sold the dinosaur says it hopes that Trinity will be available to be seen by the public too.
I wonder where you would put it if you had something that big. $8 million though. Some of your feedback here on the cheat in the ultramarathon. Woman came third after taking a car for some of the race. That was in the UK. This person says, I've regularly done ultramarathons. Kaduna to Lagos, London to Salisbury, Lower Hutt to Wellington. Why did they never tell me I couldn't use a car or a train? On the subject of childcare and paying for it when you go back to work and if it is worth it, a lot of you pointing out it is nothing new. My eldest is 19. We had 3 under 3. I worked out I had enough for a coffee a day after paying for childcare and work-related expenses. Stay home, raise amazing children, that person says. Now, tune in tomorrow at 5 a.m. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi pōpō. First up, we'll have you had your COVID booster or are you not bothered as we ride this 4th wave? First up finds out how many Kiwis are lining up for their 4th or 5th jab. So do tune in for that one, 5 a.m. tomorrow.
In the headlines at 6:30, the Employment Relations Authority will try to break the impasse in secondary teachers' stalled pay talks by facilitating bargaining. National is vowing to slash red tape for farmers, saying agriculture is over-regulated, but Greenpeace says it's a retrograde step as farmers are under-regulated, not over. The Australian government plans to introduce new standards targeting vehicle emissions in order to boost the uptake of electric cars. And Wellington Water expects